The HR Stories podcast is brought to you by the team at HR Stories. The team at HR Stories helps businesses, nonprofits, and HR practitioners better manage the employee experience, providing the tools, training, and resources needed to get HR right. For more information, check out our website at theteam@hrstories.com. Each week on the HR Stories podcast, HR and leadership experts John Thalheimer and Chuck Smikian dive into the stories that matter most to you, our listeners. We have found that there is a lesson in every story. And now our host, John Thalheimer and Chuck Smikian. Welcome to the, what is this called? Welcome to the podcast of something or something. We're going to tell a story here. I don't really know. Hey, look, I'm excited because Chuck is back from his he's been working down in the Keys, and I am excited. I've missed him for the last 2 episodes. He's here again, folks. We should welcome him. There should be applause. Woo! Because I know you guys just didn't want to listen to my voice. Chuck, we're excited that you're back. Tell us what you've been up to. What's going on?
Folks, you're listening to the HR Stories podcast, where there's a lesson in every story. John took it solo last week. It was absolutely amazing. And I am back from my European vacation. Did not do it as well as Chevy Chase could have done it, but that might go over the heads of some of our listeners today. Yeah. Folks, we like to talk about stories and HR stories and what's happening in the news. And that's how we kick off our podcast, which is what is happening in the news. And John and I like to share a couple of a potpourri or a potpourri of stories in the HR world. So I'm going to divert to my esteemed partner and see what story he's picked today that would be of interest to our listeners.
You are on a roll today. Wow. You are on a roll today.
Well, you kicked it off, man. You just jumped right in, so I'm jumping in after you. I'm trying to keep up.
Yeah, you're on a roll, though, man. So listeners, I don't know if you've heard about the NLRB ruling against Home Depot. And so this was a situation where Home Depot fired an individual for having BLM, Black Lives Matter, the initials, on their apron. Now, one of the things is, I want to set the scene here, is because at Home Depot, employees are encouraged to customize and personalize those aprons. And they do have a clear no policy, no politic kind of thing that you can put on it, right? They have all that on there. But here's what happened is at this store, there was a manager that was racist. I don't know either better way to say it, but they were racist. And so they would give minority groups, Black, Brown, Latinos, individuals worse assignments. They would harass them by saying certain things and that kind of stuff. And so these individuals got together and said, this isn't fair. And they started having these conversations, right? And I know Chuck knows where I'm going with this, right? So they had these conversations and they went to the boss, and the boss says, okay, we'll talk to this person. And so they talked to the person, nothing changed. These other employees started having more conversations. We need to do something about that. And so one of those individuals decided, in support of his brethren, his friends, he was going to put BLM on his apron. Shows up on his apron. The manager, a different manager, the bigger manager, says, hey, you can't have that on your apron. If you're going to have it on your apron, you can't come to work. The individual decides, like, well, then I'm not coming to work. They end up firing him for that. So this goes all the way up to the National Labor Relations Board. The board looks at it and puts out a ruling that Home Depot was wrong, because all that BML, the initials, related back to the protected concerted activities, right? The talking to each other, asking for help, all of that stuff is protected, and this related to that protection. So there's been a lot of conversations, Chuck, in the HR world about, what should we be doing about dress codes and making sure that we do that? And I think all that is good. And we definitely need to look at our dress codes, making sure that we're being consistent with our accountability, consistent with application. But it also goes back to managing your managers. And if you have an individual that is being racist in the workplace, maybe that's not the kind of person you want. And maybe you should fire that person. Now, they did take action, right? There was some disciplinary action taken against this person, but the employees didn't know the change of behaviors, right? And so I don't know what your thoughts on that, Chuck, and it's just something to be paying attention to for sure.
Yeah, well, my thoughts are, and you had brought this up yesterday during our HR kitchen table, our monthly roundtable of HR professionals, which is free, folks. If you ever want to sign up and join us, as we just generally chat for about an hour or so about HR stuff. It's kind of like a different version of the HR Stories podcast, but it's just John and I talking to HR folks about HR things. And one of the interesting things there was, I mean, there's a lot of things, but is the concerted activity that came out, and that's what really came under the NLRB type of thing. And we've talked about concerted activity. We had a great podcast a couple of months ago about a pizza place in Mount Lebanon, Pennsylvania, right there, my hometown area. And it was a bunch of cooks that were getting together, talk about they didn't like the work atmosphere, and the owner didn't like it, and he basically fired one of the cooks, and that was protected concerted activity. And it's funny because as I pull my notes over, I've got my story, John, has to deal with protected concerted activity. And this is where the national, a court ruled, the Third Circuit Court of Appeals ruled that the National Labor Relations Act, the NLRA, protects not only unionized employees, but also non-unionized employers. And so in this story, a manager interfered, according to the courts, unlawfully interfered with workers' rights when he threatened them that if they complained to each other, and there was a situation regarding race. So there we go. We're bringing up race again. Race-based mistreatment. He was going to fire them. This is up in New Jersey. This is a manufacturer of art supplies. And the manager tells the workers, hey, there's going to be a problem. You know, Jersey, there's going to be a problem. If they discuss,
hey, don't make fun of my New Jerseyans.
Yeah, there's going to be a problem. You know what I mean? I don't know if I'm doing a good Jersey mob.
Not at all. Not at all. I apologize to anybody from New Jersey.
Okay. Well, anyways, if there's going to be a problem, if they discuss concerns about race-based mistreatment amongst themselves, the company is called Colart of America, Colart Americas. And so it's interesting. There was a staffing firm, and just like all of our HR stories, there's a little layer upon a layer inside a croissant, shall we say. And, you know, yes, I'm thinking French. Croissant.
I can see you were in a hurry.
So after there's a staffing firm, they assigned an employee to work at this distribution center, and he complained to the center's manager about racism. Said black workers at the facility were not being treated well, and he was going to report it. And shortly thereafter, the manager of this facility goes down and tells the workers that if they have complaints, they should follow the chain of command and warn them not to voice the complaints to each other. And then later that day, the manager fires the staffing firm worker. So there was a big hearing, and the National Labor Relations Board said, you know what, Colart of America manufacturing facility, you were actually a joint employer with the staffing firm, and they upheld the charges, which included discharging improperly discharging the staffing firm worker for bringing up complaints and threatening to file charges. See, they just thought, oh, this is just a temp, right? It's a temp.
No, it's a temp.
You know what? He's bringing trouble. He's bringing trouble, I tell ya.
Trouble Atkins with T, which rhymes with P, which stands for pool. Yeah, I know.
Yeah, absolutely. And so they basically marched it up in appeal, and they lost. The company lost. So the National Labor Relations Board, and when John and I talk about concerted activity, it's when two or more employees take action for their mutual aid or protection regarding the terms and conditions of their employment. So there you go. Drop the mic. We didn't even plan that, and we've just got a string, thematic string.
That was a kind of interesting kind of your segues there. You went from my story of Home Depot to a pizza place in Pittsburgh out to Northern Jersey. And so nice. You kind of brought that all along. I appreciate that. Yeah. I love that you were adding croissants to that conversation. Whatever.
Croissant.
All right. No, so that's really important. I hadn't heard that story, but one of the things that did come out, and gosh, forgive me, I don't remember if it was January or February, but that joint employment rule, the joint employer rule by the National Labor Relations Act went into effect. The final ruling went into effect at the beginning of this year. And so if you're working with a temp per agency, you're working with a union, there's a lot of joint employer there. And if you're a staffing agency, you better be paying attention to it because it definitely impacts you as well. Yeah. What else you got going on, Chuck?
Well, this came out unofficially a couple of months ago, I think, but it hit the newspapers today. CDC relaxes COVID guidance, cuts most of the 5-day isolation period. They said that people with respiratory illnesses may resume daily activities if they have been fever-free for at least 24 hours without the aid of medications and if their symptoms are improving. And they basically apply these guidelines not only to COVID, but influenza and a respiratory virus ailments. So they're kind of slowly bringing COVID into kind of like, hey, it's the flu, it's COVID, it's a respiratory infection. And they did say vaccinations also decrease the chances of long COVID. But I think the important news for our employers is there's no 5-day waiting period anymore.
Yeah, but I would be careful, right? Because it's easy to be like, oh, there's no 5-day waiting period. We expect you to be into the office tomorrow.
Yeah.
Right. And so the key is 24 hours after they don't have a fever anymore that hasn't been reduced by medication. Right. And so a lot of times when we're not feeling well, we have a little bit of fever, we may go to the medicine cabinet and get some medicine to reduce that fever. That's not what they're saying. And so just be careful. Don't like, oh, all right, after, again, give them that time so you're not bringing in infections into your workplace.
You got anything else for us today, John?
Well, and there's a couple articles. I'll go into the one that I saw this morning. And so one of the things that happened, so there's a company that does surveys. It's called the Eldman Trust Barometer. And so they did the 2024 survey, and they found that 61% of the respondents felt business leaders purposely try to mislead people.
Oh, really?
61%. Now, that doesn't mean it's their business, right? It's not their business, but overall, we as a nation really don't know if businesses are looking out for our best interest. Right. And so we're not trusting them there. And so the article goes into thinking about when we're an employer, right? And so people start trusting us when we work there, for sure, when there's a connection and when we're being trustworthy in the workplace. And so trust is such an underlying, it's kind of the glue that holds teams together.
It's huge. I like that. The glue.
Yeah, the glue that holds us all together. And so one of the things I think we have to do is, at least in our HR world, right? We can't necessarily go and deal. I mean, we can work on operations and that kind of stuff, right? But we have to be trustworthy in HR if we want them to respect the process, respect what we do, understand that we're not doing this because it's our little kingdom. We're doing it because the employment law, federal, state, and local, says that we need to do it, right? And so we're making sure that we do that, and we're making sure it's documented, and so we're protecting the organization. And so, but really building trust up is important. And I mean, Chuck, I would love to hear how you're building trust up. I'm putting you on the spot. I get it. How you're building trust up in this fractional director HR role that you're doing right now.
No, I'm excited, John. Let's demonstrate. Could you stand up, turn around, and let's do a trust fall? I'm right here. I'm here, John. Come on back. Come on back, John. Ah! Oh boy. You did it, folks.
Hey, if you haven't been watching the video, folks, turn into our YouTube channel. That was amazing.
That was absolutely amazing. I caught him. By way of virtual hands. Yeah. Damn, here's the deal. You go in to, whether you're the new HR director, the new HR manager, the new whatever, the first thing you need to do is you listen, right? Seek first to understand, then to be understood. But you listen and you take action, right? You take action on anything that you say. You take action on things that you hear. There are things that have happened here. Like I will hear that the general manager might say, geez, I wish a certain department might get, I've talked to them a million times about getting an org chart together. So I hear that. I write that down as he's complaining. I go back. I help that person get an org chart together. All of a sudden, GM's got an org chart in front of him that afternoon. Now, I don't go and say, how do you like it? I did that. I just do it, right? And so he starts to realize if he says things, wow, things start happening, right? And Chuck's listening. And so, he starts to trust Chuck. And the other thing is follow up, and I got to tell you, I could be better and quicker, but I'm learning. And I build trust through follow up. If I say I'm going to do something in HR, we're going to do it. I was telling someone, John, that a lot of things when you go into, as I am now, I'm still the temporary HR director, but I've kind of come in to fix a lot of stuff. And people are like, we need to have this employee recognition program. And I'm like, yeah, that's great, but we got to fix some things down here. We have to build a solid foundation. And I was telling them about the checklist manifesto. And I was saying, it's the small things that can be big things, that if we don't take care of the small things, they will become big things. And those are the things that blow people's trust. And I was talking about how that inspired us, you and I, to write our book. And our new book, right, the HR check. Come on, tell me the new name of the book. We're updating the book and the name of the book. The Ultimate Book of HR Checklist is going to be...
The new name is The Ultimate Book of HR Checklist Edition.
Checklist Edition.
And so, again, this is probably, we're way ahead of our game here, but we have added, we've gone through and updated all the checklists that were in the book, and now have added 14, I think maybe 15 new checklists to there, the ones that were important. Like Chuck did a lot of work and this kind of leads into this is going to be a good segue, Chuck. Are you ready?
Yes.
And so Chuck did a lot of work. He did a work around the Pregnancy Workers Fairness Act. He did a whole checklist around that. He also did one about the Pump Act, which is what our story is about, which we're going to take a break right now, and we'll come into and we'll talk about our story. If you're all right with that, I think it's a good time to take our first break and
sure.
Go from there.
Folks, you've been listening to the HR Stories podcast, where there's a lesson in every story.
Do you like listening to the HR Stories podcast? Are there times you want to interject or ask a question? Every month, the team at HR Stories invites HR professionals and practitioners to the HR kitchen table to discuss what is happening in HR. In a small group format, up to 12 individuals will share their wisdom, hold each other accountable, and share a few laughs. HR Kitchen Table is free, but you need to register to get your seat. Go to our website at the team at hrstories.com/workshops and sign up now so you can join us. Let's talk HR.
Welcome back to the HR Stories podcast, where every episode uncovers lessons hidden in real life workplace stories. I'm Chuck Samikian, and with me is John Thalheimer, co-storyteller, and we're ready to delve into a story that's as timely as it is important. And today we're focusing on a case that highlights, significant issue in the workplace, and that is the right of nursing mothers.
Yeah, very critical story that I can't wait to get into it. Tell us what it's about, Chuck.
Yeah, we're discussing the case of two people today, Kathleen Faber and Lexis Mays. Now, they worked at McDonald's, and they brought a lawsuit that is bringing some things to light about struggling nursing mothers and what they face in the workplace, and the legal protections that should be afforded them. Now, the interesting thing, and I know I'm probably say that a couple times because a lot of these things are a little interesting to me, but this case isn't just about individual experiences. It's overall a window into laws, especially these new laws like the Pump Act, how they're being implemented, and in some cases ignored, either intentionally or unintentionally.
Yeah, we hear that a lot in our classes about people are doing things improperly, but they don't know what the laws or what they stand for. So I want to be clear when we're talking about the Pump Act, that goes to the providing urgent maternal protections for nursing mothers. Correct, Chuck?
Yeah, absolutely. And that was a big step forward in ensuring nursing mothers have all the necessary time and space to express breast milk. And you'll see in this case, having a law is one thing, but enforcing it is another. And a lot of times when these laws are created and put in place, there's some pushback. Okay. And there's also some misunderstandings, and there's missteps. So the lawsuits are starting to occur, and they're starting to occur surrounding the Pump Act. But folks, you're here with the HR Stories podcast, where there's a lesson in every story, and we talk about how others, I guess I could use the word messed up, how other organizations and companies messed up. So hopefully it won't happen to you. And today we're going to explore these two stories, break them down, and see also what remedies this lawsuit is asking for. And that's right, folks. It is an active lawsuit. We will be following it and bring you the results here on the HR Stories podcast.
It's really interesting, Chuck. You said a couple of things there, talking about the HR stories, right? And I do think we can learn from other mistakes. I think when we started this podcast, it was about how can we, as HR professionals, as leaders, learn from what other people are doing and try not to make those same mistakes. But what I think was really important to me, you said there's one thing to have a law, and then there's another thing to enforce it in the workplace, right? And so I think we're starting to see, and I think these are two great stories or examples of where the laws are now being enforced. As you said at the top of the show, we're seeing examples of where these things are being enforced. So Let's dive into the show. Let's get into what the story is about.
Yeah, so our first story is about Kathleen Faber. She's a great example of the challenges that nursing mothers are facing in the workplace. So Kathleen worked as a night manager at a McDonald's in Kansas, and that's a role she stepped into just 4 months after giving birth.
Wow. So she was returning to work. She was a new mom and she was returning to work. Wow. That is definitely a challenge. New job, new whole lifestyle. And
Oh
here she
yeah.
goes into that. Okay.
And a night manager. So her role was demanding a lot of responsibility, minimal staff support, especially during the night shift. She told the general manager that she was a breastfeeding mother and she'd need to take breaks and a place to pump. And initially, she was assured won't be a problem.
The way you say that doesn't make it like it actually happened, but that sounds reassuring, right? Okay, good, right? I came in, I as a good employee, I said, this is my needs, this is what I'm going to need. The boss said,
Yeah.
hey, that shouldn't be a problem.
Yeah, you would think so. I mean, it's not a problem. You're like, oh, this is great. You're a good manager. Thank you very much. But the reality is at this McDonald's, that was far from what was promised. In the end, the actual conditions for pumping were inappropriate. And when I say starkly inappropriate, maybe you might or may not disagree, but she was forced to pump in either a stockroom corner to avoid security cameras or in the bathroom when working with male employees. And I think I remember in the lawsuit, they go into a lot, but I think she had to build up like a wall in the stockroom of boxes.
Yeah. Boxes of paper towels and napkins and
box room.
Yeah. And it's interesting, right? Because obviously the bathroom's not the place to do it, right? The bathroom's not the place to do it, but the stock room could be appropriate. Could be an appropriate place, but now there's a security camera in there watching their every move. Not appropriate, right?
Yeah.
So, what happened? Tell me, kind of dive into there and how.
Yeah, sure.
Right.
So those two things are clear violation of the Pump Act because the Pump Act mandates, and we'll go into it a little more detail later, but it mandates private, non-bathroom space for nursing mothers. But the issues didn't stop with just the space for pumping because finding time for breaks was a major hurdle.
So how so? Tell me how did that?
Yeah, well, here's the deal. Night manager, and I didn't get this from the lawsuit, but I'm thinking she's probably night manager third shift, maybe 11 at night to 7 in the morning, 10 at night to 6 in the morning, that sort of thing. But she struggled to find time to pump because she's overseeing operations. She's got minimal staff, makes it difficult to take breaks. On about half of her shifts, she didn't get a break at all.
Wow. I just can't imagine the work conditions. It just sounds so stressful in the workplace.
Yeah, and it was. The lack of accommodation actually led to physical discomfort. And not to get into the graphic details here, but there was she had engorgement and then a decrease in her milk supply. And so once again, it added extra stress for her life, her family, and herself.
Wow. And so, okay, it's always my question, but what did the manager do?
What did the manager do?
How did they handle it?
Sure. So it was probably, I would say, disappointing, maybe to say the least, but perhaps, as you often say, John, they did not know what they do not know. And so despite Kathleen expressing her concern, the manager indicated there's no private space available. And, John, I got to ask you, have you ever worked at a fast food type of place like this?
No, I mean, I worked at an AM PM mini market. Right. And so not the same, right? We had a little more room and we had storage room and an office manager's desk area, but yeah, so a little different.
Yeah, but it's a similar thing. I mean, there's literally I worked at a Long John Silver's, and as I read this story and as I write it out, I keep trying to think, where would she have pumped at my old restaurant?
Yeah, I mean, it's got to be tough, right? And so where do you find that location? And, kind of looking at it, the supply room seems to be in a McDonald's, seemed to be the best place. But if that McDonald's has a camera in there to protect from inventory theft and that kind of stuff, that rules that out. Bathrooms
Yeah.
ruled out. And so I'm really kind of interested to see what the court case suggested McDonald's handled it. Because I think one of the things you said when we were with the producer, you're like, what's interesting is that the court was kind of projecting like, these are the things that you need to do.
Yeah, so that's a real interesting part of the story, and it's a wake-up call for a lot of our listeners. And I can't wait to get to that. But in this situation, no concrete steps were taken to rectify things, leaving Kathleen in a difficult position.
That means like that manager basically said to her, you don't matter.
Yeah. And so what ends up happening is stress, anxiety, guilt, and it ultimately led her to switch to part-time and then resign due to lack of, accommodation.
Yeah. I mean, again, I think what this story says, and I think this, we talk about this a lot. Managers, owners, general managers, franchise owners need to be aware of these laws. They can't just ignore them.
You're right. So next I want to talk about Lexis Mays, the next story. And she's another employee at a McDonald's who faced similar challenges to like Kathleen. Although interesting enough, she's in Clinton, New York. And her experience kind of further illustrates these issues, systemic issues in accommodating nursing mothers.
Yeah, and I want to kind of throw this note in here, maybe my legal note. McDonald's are franchises. Most of them are franchises. They are not owned by corporate McDonald's. They are owned by either an individual owner or a hospitality group. And they have general managers that manage these things. And so when we look at the fault of this, it's the general manager of that restaurant or that franchise, not McDonald's as a whole, right? Because we know McDonald's corporate probably has in their offices nursing stations, that kind of things in there. And so tell us Lexi's story. How did this situation come up?
Yeah, so that's a great point. And that actually, remember we talked about there's always a story within a story wrapped in a chocolate croissant.
Oh, now
and in this story, and that is true. That's actually part of the lawsuit is trying to say collectively these franchises are somehow joint employers of big McDonald's. So they're going after the whole pie in this lawsuit.
Yeah, and there's a lot. I mean, again, that's a lot of big conversations. And I know this isn't the story about that, but there's a lot of conversations. Are they and owners of franchisees, not owners of franchisees, but those corporations that have franchisees are very clear that those individuals are not employees of them. That's not. It's all in the documents, relations, and that kind of stuff. So
yeah.
Just kind of throwing that out. So,
well, Lexis has been with McDonald's, that franchise, that location since May of 2019. And by July of 2020, she'd become a manager. And then she had a child in January of 2023. So she's a long-term, for relatively speaking, 4 years or so, a long-term employee. She returns in late February of 2023. She talks to her HR manager and her manager, store manager and HR manager, and that she would be breastfeeding and would need to pump at work. And of course, they assured her she would have time to do this.
So I just want to go back because you said something that I think I'm probably going to get myself in trouble here, but that's just like, it's amazing. She had a child in January of 2023.
Oh, right.
And was back at work 1 month later.
Yeah.
Again, right? That's reality for a lot of people because they're not getting paid when they're not working and they need the money to make their things, right? But that, again, probably not the best lifestyle, right?
Yeah.
So
well, you know what?
America,
Yeah. people have to make money, and that's the way it goes, unfortunately. But she at least she went back to work. She communicated her needs, and the way they responded was, I would say, far from adequate also. Lexus was told, once again, just like Kathleen, pump in the back room, which didn't even have a door, leaving her exposed to other crew members. She raised concerns about the lack of privacy, but was told there's no other space available.
Yeah, right. And so that whole open office. Now, again, right, the Pump Act doesn't say that we need a lockable place that they need to go into. It says they need a place that they will not be disturbed while
Yeah.
they're expressing milk, right? And so I
Yeah.
could see
I mean,
where
and
I could
this,
see where somebody in HR who's not in the workforce and that kind of stuff went, oh, you can just go in there and you'll be fine. Ugh, not
yeah.
necessarily.
So here's the deal. Crew members, and this is in the lawsuit, crew members would walk in or pass by while she's pumping, created an uncomfortable situation, and she actually felt humiliated by this.
What about breaks when she needed to pump? Was she able to get those?
Yeah, that's kind of another struggle too. She only got one unpaid 30-minute lunch break, which she used to pump. But she often, as is the case, needed more than once per shift. And there were times that she couldn't take breaks, especially when she was the only manager on duty.
So she had to juggle her managerial responsibility and her need to pump, and there was no one supporting it. There was no adequate support, right?
Yep, lack of breaks, absence of private space, once again, reduction in milk supply, significant emotional stress, pumping in an open area, colleagues could see her, adding to her anxiety. So I think I've added all that up.
Yeah, right. So this really underscores the need for employers to provide not just the time, but also a suitable place for pumping. And it's interesting, right? Because the Pump Act came in being in the end of 2022, 2023, really got enforced. Now, but it had been on the books for a while. The Pump Act just expanded who was underneath it. And so I don't understand why employers are not taking this as seriously as they should.
Right. And I think as more and more lawsuits come out, eventually the word's going to get out like, oh man, we really need to do something. But I do want to share with you how Kathleen and Lexi in the lawsuit want McDonald's to remedy the situation going forward for other working mothers, or how they should have done it, because that's what they're being sued for. We talk about this in the past. In a small operation, fast food location, another location, maybe a kiosk in a mall, or a small store like the AM/PM Mini Mart, or even, a one-room office in a strip mall. Sometimes I've gone to see my Allstate agent, and he's just in a big room with like 5 or 6 desks and with maybe a cubicle wall. So what can employers do? And so there are some points I want to share with you as to what came up in this lawsuit.
Yeah, I'm eager to hear them, but I would love for you to refresh the listeners what is required by the Pump Act for us as employers.
Sure. So since 2010, the Fair Labor Standards Act, or FLSA, has required employers to provide lactation accommodations, especially 1 year after a child, up to 1 year after a child is born. But there were some limitations and gaps in that 2010 provisions. So Congress passed the Pump Act of 2022. It expanded the scope, and it said, hey, there are 2 basic fundamental requirements. The first thing is employers must provide reasonable break time as needed for employees to express milk. And that's a big deal. The frequency, duration of breaks can vary, but they have to do it. And the second thing, John, is the need for private space. Not a bathroom. It can't be an unsanitary area. It needs to be shielded from view. And as you brought up, security cameras, free from intrusion. And it's about ensuring the privacy and dignity of nursing mothers. And if a workplace doesn't have a designated space, employers, okay, here's the drop the mic thing, employers are required to create one. And it could be as simple as temporarily designated an enclosed office, providing a portable lactation pods equipped with amenities like a sink and a refrigerator.
Yeah, and so what about comfort and sanitation of these places? Because when so when you say, "Oh, go back to that storeroom," there's a locked door. We have a refrigerator. You're going to go in there. I'm thinking. I have to say, I'm thinking about The Office right now. Right, the television show The Office.
Oh, of course, yeah.
Right, their storage closet was not the most sanitary storage closet in there. And so what's the responsibility as us as employers and HR professionals?
Yeah, so they have to be comfortable. They have to be sanitary. It's not just about providing space. It's saying it has to be conducive to the health and well-being of mother and child. And there have been some recent lawsuits, U.S. Postal Service, Dollar General, one of my favorite, HR violators. They're always in the news.
That's a Nashville company. Don't pick on it too much.
And but there have been some big lawsuits out there, and there are more coming. And the law does allow these breaks to be unpaid, and if the employee is not completely relieved of duty, the time needs to be compensated.
Right. So if they're multitasking, either on answering texts or emails or doing anything, I would say as an employer, I would just pay them.
Right. Yeah, it's so much easier.
Yeah.
And it's not that much more money.
Yeah, you're asking for trouble.
They're going to be there anyways.
Yeah.
You would have paid them anyways.
All right, so good. That was a good detailed explanation. And it's really eye-opening how Pump is designated to support nursing mothers like Kathleen and Lexus. And their stories, right? Their stories illustrate the troubling gap between those legal requirements, what the law says, and the actual workplaces. So what's the solution? How do we solve this? What did the lawsuit say? And what would you offer as a solution to small businesses that may not have room?
Yeah, John, I think what I'm going to do is put the link of this of the lawsuit into the show notes because the interesting thing is they put pictures in there. So from the lawsuit, we learned that there are feasible solutions like purchasing portable lactation pods or adapting existing spaces to create secure private areas for pumping. And they're not just theoretical, they're practical. And I would say affordable. That's what the lawsuit said. That's what some people say. Some companies may say it's not, but you go into the airport, you see these, I think they're called Mama Mia's or something like that. But in this lawsuit, they took pictures and they placed them in different locations to say, look, this could fit in your, right. But the lawsuit emphasized implementing simple, effective measures, those maybe even prefabricated spaces, converting clean offices with doors locked and locks, and even allowing the use of the restaurant manager's locked office, the domain.
That would be simple. That would be the simple thing. And I was thinking when we were talking about this, and after our production meeting, I went for a walk, and I was thinking about this because here's a McDonald's. Right. So here's a McDonald's. Obviously, they have staff members that are nursing mothers, but I would guess that they probably also have customers that are nursing mothers. And what would happen if you take the Mama Mia, but the private lactation pod and put it out in your restaurant, or maybe in the restaurant, maybe in a better location. I don't know. but would that be a benefit to your customers as well as your employees? I get, right? And so then I start thinking,
that's interesting take. That's an interesting take. I like it.
Yeah. And then logistically, a lot of things come up for me, but trying to solve this problem, and because I think I'm going to fall a little bit on these franchise owners, is my expectation is that they're probably not dealing with lactating mothers very often. Now, I could be wrong. I don't know, but that would be my assumption. And so oh gosh, I need to deal with it for this person for a year, but then I may not need to deal with it for another 5 years.
Yeah.
And taking that space away may cause me undue hardship. It may cause me trouble. And so coming up with that simple but effective solution, like the officer manager's office, would be a good thing.
You know, I could see a business opportunity here, John, like really inexpensive pods that you and I could go in, set up. They're already plumbed and ready to go. Plug and play.
Yeah.
So, but the pods idea, what do you think about that? What do you think about that pod?
I mean, again, it's sound. Is it feasible? I just don't know if it's truly feasible and how do I deal with it. But on the other hand, what's the cost of the lawsuit?
Yeah.
And I think, right. And so let's say that these franchise owners are really smart. They know the law. They're paying attention to it. And maybe they did the risk benefit analysis saying, what's the chances of one of these workers reaching out to the Department of Labor and having a lawsuit come up against us? Well, guess what, ladies and gentlemen? It isn't that hard, and employees are much more aware. They have these things, these little phones that they could go, what happens when my employer doesn't allow me a chance to express milk for my baby? And then boom. Not only is the Department of Labor showing up there, but I can tell you probably 4 or 5 lawyers are showing up there as well.
They just have to say, hey, Siri, so I'm not talking to you, Siri. Okay. So, so for our listeners, whether you're an HR manager or nursing mother yourself, understanding your rights and the practical ways that workplaces can support you is crucial. So Kathleen and Lexi, if you're out there, these are cautionary tales and you've taken it forward. You've gotten recognition for nursing mothers everywhere, a call to action for better workplace practices, and an ongoing reminder of the need for awareness and compliance with these types of laws.
Yes. Thank you for bringing that to us, Chuck. I always think it's a good story to bring to our listeners. And again, we have to be paying attention. We have to make the right decisions for our organizations. Listeners, you have been listening to the HR Stories podcast, where there is a lesson in every story. Thank you for listening to the HR Stories podcast. The material presented in this podcast is for informational purposes only. Chuck and John always recommend using an employment lawyer or HR consultant to handle any legal concerns or HR issues. We do our best to double check sources and make sure the information we are providing is accurate. We may eliminate or embellish without changing the basic narrative to make the story easier to understand. In certain circumstances, we may change identifying information to protect the innocent. The HR Stories broadcast is brought to you by the team at HR Stories. The team at HR Stories is designed to help anyone with HR responsibilities be better at managing the employee experience. To engage with us, go to the hrstoriesteam.com and learn more about how the team at HR Stories can support your business or nonprofit. Thank you for listening to the HR Stories podcast, where there is a lesson in every story.